So, hello, welcome to my channel. It's called Pigments of the Past, and it's where I discuss history and other interesting things that are related to or inspired by makeup. In today's video, I'll be discussing poisonous plants, which is inspired by a palette from an incredible indie brand called Bella Beaute Bar. And the palette that inspired me was Poison Garden. So it's a really beautiful palette that has just these gorgeous, absolutely wonderful duochromes, multichromes, and gorgeous matte, buttery mattes. It's one of my favorite. Like their formula is, I don't know. Their Bella Beaute formula might be my favorite eyeshadow formula that I've tried so far, but it's definitely up there. And so all of the plant names, or all of the shade names are poisonous plants, and it's all inspired by poisonous plants. So that in turn inspired me to look into research some of these plants, and so I will be doing my makeup and discussing some of the plants that have shade names that are in this palette. So I won't really be discussing the makeup that I'm using, but if you are curious about anything that I am using, it will all be in the description box below. Alright, so let's get started. So the first plant I want to discuss is based on this shade right here, Lantana. So lantanas are basically invasive, noxious weeds. So the whole part of the plant is pretty toxic to livestock and pretty much all mammals. The berries, birds will eat the berries, and there's some insects that can eat the plant. But the only mammal that can tolerate the leaves are swamp wallabies, which is interesting. So the reason they're such an issue is, one, because they're extremely invasive, so they're taking over invasive spaces for other plants and animals that rely on those native plants. But the problem is they're so hard to get rid of. And there are several reasons for that. One reason is because this nasty thing releases chemicals into the soil surrounding it, so it will inhibit and can poison other plants that are nearby. It has a zillion seeds. Like, one lantana plant can produce over 12,000 seeds in its lifetime, which is a lot. And then the thing is that it can germinate very easily, and it likes certain things. So birds will eat it, and like the seeds will go through their digestion, and they'll spread it all over, and that helps it grow. And fire helps it grow. And so that's a huge issue, right? Because also, so you think, okay, maybe we can like cut it down, right? No, you can't cut it down. If you cut it, it will produce these little offshoots called coppices that will actually grow even faster than the parent plant and make more of a dense thicket. So you can't do that. You think, oh, maybe I could burn it. You can't do that because it likes the seeds will germinate. They like fire. And then the other thing you think is, oh, well, maybe you just rip it out of the ground. No, because if you rip it out of the ground, then it disturbs the soil. And like I said, they have 12,000 some seeds over its lifetime. So there's all these seeds already in the ground. And guess what else they like? Disturbed soil. So super problematic from, an ecological standpoint here. In fact, Australia has been trying to deal with it for quite a while. They are non-native. So the two countries and areas that have the biggest problem with them being invasive is Australia and India. And in Australia, they have tried actually to release over 30 different types of insect to kill it. But it turns out that doesn't work, or hasn't worked so far, because the insects that will eat it don't prefer it. So if they have another option, they won't eat the lantana. So that doesn't really put a dent in the population. So, one thing I forgot is that the lantana seeds can lay dormant for up to 11 years. So if you're ripping out those plants, then there's all these dormant seeds that could be 10 years old that are now going to germinate. So in India, they have created an initiative through the Shola project called the Lantana Project, or through the Shola Trust called the Lantana Project, and that actually has local craftsmen creating furniture out of lantanas. So apparently, because they're such hardy plants, they're also very weather resistant, and they're even more sturdy and weather resistant than bamboo. So a lot of local craftsmen have been turning it into like patio furniture. So if you're in the market for some sustainable patio furniture, yeah, you should check it out. All right, cool. So the next shade I am going to discuss is Hellebore. So that is the shade Hellebore. And Hellebore, let me tell you, this one's super interesting. So they're also called winter roses or Christmas roses. And you would think with that etymology that has to do with the like the fact that it's so toxic, right? But it's actually not, apparently. Apparently it is from an old Latin or French root, meaning a plant that fawns eat, which I'm not really sure how, because it's generally toxic to most things, like most herbivores and rabbits. Although you do have to ingest quite a bit to cause significant issues, or at least, as I will say later, as you will see later, in concentrated quantities. All right, this is really hard to talk and do my eyeliner, but I will do my best. So yeah, the Hellebore is this really pretty sort of dark grungy muted purple shade. Another thing about the Hellebore is it has a bitter taste. So generally, unlike the Lantana, generally, you know, livestock, rabbits, people won't eat it because it tastes bad. Okay, so there have been at least 5 reported cases of human poisoning where people were trying to make gentian wine, because there is a plant that is called the yellow gentian that apparently, you know, a lot of people like to make wine out of. Well, people will go out and try and find wild Hellebore, or not wild Hellebore, wild gentian, and the problem with that is that if it's not flowering, it looks very much like, or Hellebore looks very much like the yellow gentian. So they will often grow next to each other too. So people have poisoned themselves by trying to make gentian wine and accidentally making Hellebore wine and then being hospitalized. But as far as I could tell, no one has died from doing that. At least no reported deaths have been done from that. But you will be very sick and go into the hospital. So interestingly, Hellebore was briefly on the market as a hypertension medication because it will lower blood pressure. And in fact, if you do end up getting poisoned and having to go to the ER, one of the main concerns is low blood pressure. So they will actually give you atropine to keep your blood pressure up, because that is a significant problem with getting poisoned by Hellebore. The other thing that Hellebore does is it's a emetic. It causes vomiting. So back in the Middle Ages, actually even before that, because the idea of the 4 humors is even from like Greek antiquity. So I'll probably do another video if anyone's interested, or even if people aren't interested, on the 4 humors, because I'm very interested in like medicine from antiquity and the Middle Ages. But anyway, to kind of sum it up, it is an emetic, right? So it makes you throw up, and the idea of the 4 humors is that if you are having, you know, some kind of medical or mental health issue, it is because your humors are out of balance, and then they would try to balance them by bleeding, or in the case of using Hellebore to make you throw up. So specifically, Hellebore was thought to reduce black bile, and someone that has an excess of black bile would be called melancholic. So a lot of times that would be if you have depression, they would say, oh, you have too much black bile, and so they would give you Hellebore to make you throw up, and then try to balance your humors out that way. All right, so I'm gonna finish up with this shade, or try to. So the next plant I'm going to talk about is Bleeding Heart. It's this guy right here. And this, I have a lot to talk about this. This is really, like, I knew none of this stuff at all. So because of its shape, it has inspired a lot of folklore, both in the East and in the West. Sometimes between some of the cultures, there's actually not like a huge change in the story too, which is kind of crazy. So basically, I am going to start with the Japanese tale, and then kind of, yeah, anyway, I'm going to start with the Japanese tale. So the story goes, oh, and then the cool thing about it too is that each piece of the flower, like you can kind of, I'll show some up on the screen so it makes more sense, but each piece of the flower has, you kind of take the flower apart, and each part of the flower kind of tells part of the story, which is so cool and so interesting. So I'm going to start with the Japanese tale, and that is that there was a beautiful and rich maiden, and a local man fell in love with her, and he wanted to marry her. And so the first thing he did was he gave her 2 luxurious, beautiful pet rabbits. And she accepted these, but she said, I can't love you, but she gladly accepted the gifts. So that gave him some hope. So then he went out and got her 2 beautiful embroidered silk slippers. And again, she said, she gladly accepted the gifts, but said, I can't love you. I don't love you. So the man decided then that he's like, okay, well, I still love her, so I'm gonna pull out all the stops, and he spent his entire fortune on the most beautiful earrings that had ever been made. And when he gave them to her, she said, you know, she accepted them gladly again, but told him, I'm sorry, I don't love you, I'm not gonna marry you. So at this point, the man was penniless and in despair. So he used his dagger and stabbed himself through the heart. And where his blood fell, that is where the Bleeding Heart flowers first started to grow. And in some parts of the story, or some versions of the story, that's the end, and then some versions of the story, the rich maiden, sees what he has done and realizes that his love was actually true, and she weeps forevermore. So next I'm going to talk about the European version. So again, with the European version, you use, like, all the different parts of the flower have different parts of the story. So again, it's the same kind of thing, except I believe this time it's a prince and a princess. So a prince falls in love with a princess, and she is not so sure about him. And he then buys her these beautiful magical, in this case, he then gifts her, the first thing he gives her is 2 beautiful magical rabbits. But she declines to marry him. The next thing he gives her are beautiful silk slippers. She, again, refuses him. He then gives her the beautiful earrings, and she rejects him. And finally, there's 2 versions in the story. So the first version is he uses his sword, and he goes and slays a dragon. And then she accepts him at this point. And the reason is that she didn't care for fine gifts, but she wanted a prince that was brave and that would defend her and her country. The next European version is the same up until the last part is not a sword. it's a magic wand. It's a magic fairy wand. And so he gifts, so the fourth gift, he gives her this magic fairy wand. And when she goes to sleep that night, it gives her, she has two dreams. In the first dream, she rejects the prince again, finally, and she is very unhappy. Her country gets invaded, and she's miserable for the rest of her life. And in the second version, and in the second dream, she accepts the prince, and they live happily ever after. So when the princess wakes up the next day, then she goes and marries the prince the next day. So then the final folktale I'm going to talk about is the Chinese version, which is completely different than the other two. So in Chinese, I guess the name for bleeding heart is translated to purse peony, and that is partially because of it looks like a traditional, like, proprietary, or like a lucky bridal purse, Chinese purse, hung like upside down on a peony tree. So the legend is that there was a beautiful jade maiden named Sijun, and she was secretly in love with a local soldier who had to go off to war. And in his first 2 years of war, or first 2 years, he would not be able to write to her or communicate to her at all, so she would not hear from him at all for 2 years. And during that time, she had many, many suitors. She's beautiful, but she refused them all, waiting for her soldier to return. And furthermore, for every month that he was gone, she would embroider a silk purse and hang it on the peony tree outside of her window. And so there were many, many of these embroidered silk purses hanging from the tree, and they were her embroidery was so exquisite that it was said to have fooled the birds and the bees. And she continued to loyally make these purses for him every month for the entire 2 years that he was gone. When the gods saw her beautiful embroidery, as well as her loyalty to her love, they decided to reward her by making those silk purse flowers into real flowers, and that is how the bleeding heart, or the purse peony, came to be. Additionally, these are still considered a great sign of love in China, and they're like the love flower that you would gift to someone that you love, or maybe propose with, but it's said to be equivalent to kind of the traditional red rose in European traditions in terms of symbolizing love. All right, so the next shade that I've already started working on, as you probably can tell, is Bloodroot. Now this one also has some wild things too. Definitely some not great things. So first of all, it's kind of interesting because it is not spread by insects or birds or mammals. The flowers spread their seeds through myrmecory, I think. Myrmecory? Anyway, this word, which basically means it is spread by ants, and that is because there is a fleshy piece around the seed that is very attractive to ants, and I guess not really to other things, but basically the ants will, take it down to their nest, and then the seed is protected and it can germinate inside the ant's nest after the ants have eaten around the fleshy part that they like. So that's kind of interesting. Oh, okay, so Bloodroot. It was on the market for a while in a product called Viadent, because Bloodroot is a really good anti-plaque ingredient. So it was on the market for a while until doctors started, and people started getting ouroleucoplakia, which is mouth lesions that can often turn into oral cancer. So that is no longer sold for that reason. Well, actually, that's the crazy thing, is you can still buy Bloodroot. because one of the main like alternative medicines that people will use is called a drawing salve or a black salve. Yeah, so you could actually still buy Bloodroot like on Amazon or things that contain Bloodroot extract, which is wild because it is used in like alternative medicine for like black salves, or drawing salves. That's what they're called, and it's marketed, you know, to draw out toxins, and sometimes people will try and drink it to like purify their blood. One thing that it actually could possibly actually work for would be like drawing out splinters, but basically it will burn the crap out of your skin. Basically, it is called an escharotic, which if you think of the word necrotic, escharotic, it's kind of similar. It just means that it will eat through tissues. So putting it as a salve on your skin is not a good thing. For some reason, it has been kind of put out there by alternative quacks, basically, is that it can supposedly cure all types of cancer. So people have put it frequently. They'll use it for like melanoma, and they'll put it on, you know, if they have a skin cancer spot that's like starting to become cancer, they will put it on themselves topically. But then, like I said, it's an escharotic, so it eats all of the tissues all the way around. So people have died from this, but also people have had to have like serious plastic surgery, like restorative plastic surgery, because it can be so damaging to the skin and your tissues. And in fact, there is the villain. I'm about to talk about the villain of today's story, and that is a man called Dennis Wayne Jensen. He is an Australian man, and as far as I know, still alive and out there. And basically, in 2018, and also this was after he had already gotten in trouble by posing as a lawyer. And yeah, basically this guy had already got in trouble for giving legal advice when he wasn't supposed to, and people were paying him for legal advice, so he was basically pretending to be a lawyer. But this actually happened the same year that this next story happened. So in 2018, he was masquerading as a doctor, like an alternative medicine type doctor, and he was giving people B17, which to cure their cancer, like drinking it, and that can actually, the quantities he was giving to people and what he was doing was they could have died. He could have poisoned them, basically. They probably were poisoning themselves, but luckily for those people, it never got to the point of death. But yeah, so the next story is really sad. Okay, so in 2018, this guy was masquerading as a doctor, and a woman named Helen Lawson, who was a top cyclist and also an ER nurse, went to go see him. And she had been recently diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And he basically gave her a bunch of black salve containing bloodroot, and told her to basically topically put it over her pelvis and her stomach to cure her ovarian cancer. And unfortunately, she did do this, and her longtime partner said that when she went to the ER, there was so much damage and there was nothing to stitch together that there wasn't anything that the surgeons could do, basically. So she ended up dying from this guy. At another point, this one of his other patients, I don't know if you can even say that because he's not a real doctor, refused treatment because he had basically put his hands on her and declared her cancer-free. So, not a great guy. But unfortunately, he never got any jail time or anything for this. He was basically just banned. The Victorian Health Commission just banned him from claiming to cure cancer or from practicing any kind of medicine. So that's crazy. And then, did this guy stop with the grift? No, he did not. In 2020, he got back on his pretending to be a lawyer scheme, and he gave advice to the parents of a man accused of rape, so a rapist. And so anyway, he was giving legal advice, paid legal advice, and these poor parents of this guy accused thought he was legit. And basically, it doesn't say exactly in the articles that I read what happened, but basically, the advice that he gave to this family involved the accused breaking an IVO, which I think that's just the Australian term, was an intervention order, which I guess is the Australian term kind of for like a restraining order. So basically, this stupid dentist told these parents of this guy that was accused something along the lines that would involve them breaking the restraining order, and they did it and got in trouble. And yeah, it was not good for obviously the parents, and whatever happened, we don't know exactly like what that entailed, but yeah, so finally they did. He was charged with giving unsound legal advice, like not being qualified to give legal advice and doing that. But that was the only thing he was convicted of, and he was sentenced to 3 months in prison for that. And I could not find if he ever actually did serve the time, because in the article it stated that the judge had suspended his sentence for 12 months, and this was back in 2022, so I couldn't find anything saying whether he actually did do the time or... Yeah, but basically, this guy is a piece of shit, and yeah, keeps ruining other people's lives to make a buck. Alright, so I just put my eyelashes on, and then the last poisonous plant we'll be discussing today is called Angel's Trumpet, and that is the shade there. So Angel's Trumpet is extinct in the wild, which basically means that the only Angel's Trumpets growing today are either cultivated or maybe some plants that have been, like escapees of that. But basically, it's thought that there was some kind... The way it used to spread was there was some kind of megafauna that used to be spread it back in that went extinct in the Pleistocene, just based on the fossil records. And so people like Angel's Trumpet because it looks cool, and it has a very fragrant smell to it, and it actually is fragrant at night, and so it is mainly moths are mainly attracted to it. So yeah, this is just like a gorgeous shimmer shade. But anyway, some of the more interesting parts about Angel's Trumpet is that it is still used today by South American shamans, particularly in the Andes, because it has quite strong psychotropic effects. So it is still used today for rituals, and it was thought that it was used quite a bit for that in the past. I think people have known about its psychotropic effects for a very long time. So unfortunately one of my lights just went out, but hopefully you can still see everything. Alright, so where were we? Okay, back to Angel's Trumpet. So it's still cultivated because it smells really good. And, oh yeah, so the psychotropic effects. So it was interesting when I was researching this because I found a lot of interesting claims. Like, I try to look at, good sources for everything, so I'm not just saying stuff, but I found something, saying that in, like, ancient times, they used to, like, drug people with it. When, like, if a lord died, they would drug all of his servants and bury them alive. And then another thing was that, they would give it to children as punishment. And I was kind of like, okay, like that might be true, but how do we know that, right? So I did some digging and I did not find any primary sources saying that any of that was true. So I just wanted to put that out there that, you know, be careful with your sources. And I did not use ChatGPT, but I could imagine that if you did ask ChatGPT, that it would probably give you that information, just because it's sort of surface level information that seems to be like, you know, something somebody kind of was like, oh, well, this might have happened, and then it just became like passed down through multiple sources. So, but yeah, there are no primary sources saying that, you know, people use that to punish their children by giving them, you know, horrifying trips. Like, it could be possible, it could have happened, but anyway, that's just a side note. But it is, in fact, still used today as a psychotropic and with some shamans in South America, and it was definitely used for ritual practices in ancient times as well. I just think we don't really know the specifics as far as I could find in my research. So then the last sort of interesting thing about Angel's Trumpet is that a particular kind of butterfly will lay its caterpillars on it, and it'll be the primary source of food for the caterpillars, the leaves specifically. And the caterpillars, right, will eat those leaves, and they'll do what's called sequestering. So they will retain the tropane alkaloids, which are the poisonous part of the plant. They will retain those alkaloids, and it will sequester it all through when it pupates into an adult butterfly. And that is how the Placidula that is how the Placidula urianasa butterfly is poisonous, and that is one of its main defense mechanisms. So I thought that was interesting, and I know that is also the case with other creatures. Like poison dart frogs, certain types of poisonous frogs. You can, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but it is possible to keep them as pets, like legally, of course. As long and you can keep them from becoming poisonous if you don't feed them the plant whatever plant it is that they sequester the poison to make themselves poisonous. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And on that note, I will continue my makeup. But yeah, so just let me know in the comments if, did you know any of this before this video? Did I miss anything? Especially like to know if any of you guys have like heard the folk tales about Bleeding Heart before, or with any of this stuff really. Like these things that you know maybe have been passed down in your culture. I would be very interested to know about that. As well as, had you heard about that guy in Australia, the horrible Dennis Wayne Jensen guy? Honestly, I only found a few articles, so I was quite surprised that, you know, didn't seem to be more widely covered. But I think I accidentally used my winter shade, so I hope I can fix this foundation. So yeah, if you have any more ideas or things you'd like me to cover, or if you have any suggestions for particular makeup palettes, please let me know. And if you are a brand and you would like me to cover one of your palettes, definitely please reach out, and I will go ahead and finish the rest of my makeup, and then I'll be back. And this is the final look. So if you enjoyed today's video, please leave me a like, and I would love it if you would subscribe and support this channel. And yeah, this is part 1 of poisonous plants. Bye!